Hello, my name is Chris Mims, and you are listening to Dope. I'm back with another episode. another episode.
Another episode.
So, story time before we get started with the with the actual episode. We just finished setting up. George got here, 2 hours ago, just about.
I got here like at 5. So, 2 hours.
And so now we're finally rolling. It's been a very hectic day for me, but we've already shot this episode, actually.
Yeah, we have. We've done it. There were technical difficulties, and also I guess it's just like we were getting our first steps in. So it's like, all right, let's just redo it.
Yeah, I attempted to shoot an episode by myself, essentially without crew. Normally we have 1 or 2 people here running the cameras, helping build the set. But I had the equipment, and I was just like, fuck it, let's try to do another one before I have to get the equipment back. It didn't go so well. We shot a few more episodes. Now we are once again shooting without any crew because I once again am like, fuck it, let's shoot another
I feel like that's the mentality that you very much carry. No offense, but it's very much like, fuck it, let's just do it, which is a good and not a bad thing, but like a in hindsight 2020. But I feel like in the shoots that we have done, it's been very like, fuck it, let's just do it and we'll figure it out,
Gotta figure it out. That is my philosophy. I think that especially when you're not being paid, right? Yeah. When you don't have a paymaster and like there's no rubric for what you have to be doing. You're just doing it of your own volition and people are helping you out of their own volition. Then you might as well get to the finish line.
Yeah.
Without like stressing people out. As long as you can do it without stressing people out, you just got to finish it.
Well, and it's better to just finish something rather than just have it lingering in the ether.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, whatever happened to that? It's like, oh, shoot, my bad.
But it has led to some reckless abandonment for some production, technicalities, Well,
I remember it's like, fuck it, let's just film it. And it's like, oh, where's the camera? It's never been that bad, but it's been that kind of energy sometimes.
No, it's gotten there. Cheaters Ring, I did straight up forget.
Oh, you did?
One day. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you were there. We were trying to figure out how we were going to shoot it, and like, we're like, I have a DSLR somewhere. I was like, nah, but this whole thing's in 4K, and it was like a whole thing. But anyway, it's been a whole thing getting here. We are finally here. We are re-recording this episode. Yeah. I'm here with George Montoya, a.k.a. Jorge Montoya, a.k.a. Jorge Mont, a.k.a.
J.E. Montoy.
Is that's how you pronounce your?
Well, that's like the
Ubisoft tag or whatever.
Yeah. That's like my gamer tag. Like I usually just go with J.E. Montoy because it's my first my first name initial, J Esteban E Montoy. And my UCI gave it to me. They're like, here's your UCI email, and I was like, oh, well, that kind of works. So I just
institutionalized, huh?
Man, you know this. I've been about the system for years. We've had a whole conversation about how it might not be the best move, and it's like, well, true.
But you are a videographer,
yes,
an editor, a colorist, director, a sometimes writer, and the second half of a podcast.
Yes,
called Retrograde. So you're on a podcast, and you're a podcaster. You're, I think, the second podcaster I've had on. So you have a certain standard, I assume, with speaking on the mic that we're gonna hit.
Oh, absolutely. Look, man, I'm seasoned. I my voice, everything, my cadence, I'm perfect.
All right.
No. On my podcast, I'm definitely the wild card. You've got the straight man, and then you've got the funny man. I'm the funny guy. Austin's very much the straight shooter. Like my parents, when they listen to the podcast, they're like, "Oh, he sounds like a real radio host." And I was like, "Oh, what do I sound like?" You sound like you, son. Isn't that good enough? And I'm like, okay, I see how it is.
How it is.
But it's a good back and forth. It creates a good environment because we never stray too far from the line. But it's always entertaining enough. When we're talking about this educational stuff on these older films, it's like we make it funny and interesting.
Well, thank you for coming once again.
Hey, no problem.
On the podcast. We'll talk a little bit more about Retrograde, but thank you for coming through yet a second time.
Thanks for having me, man. I love working with you.
And we're gonna. I have some new questions here. We're gonna ask some of the same questions as we did last time. And there are some new questions
Okay.
that I would also like to ask, but it's also going to be largely conversational, as you know, how we do around here. So anyway, how's it going? What's good?
It's been all right. Well, it's been a crazy month, as you know. It's been a crazy month. I don't know. A lot more self-evaluation going on. A lot more of kind of like reprioritizing like where I want to be at in like 5 years. I think asking myself that more now, asking where I want to be in 5 years and what are the actual steps that I need to take to get there, to just further my career.
Do you think it's all like work related, or do you think any of that has to do with turning 30?
No,
And has any of it felt like natural, or has it all been like largely it's just time because of certain?
I think certain
aspects of
events have led me to this point, because I do believe that there was, I mean, like we were saying, like, you know, getting institutionalized. There is something about being in the system that just you get comfortable with, and you're like, oh, this is not bad. And then you wake up one day and it's like, oh, things are kind of weird, and maybe I'm not totally about this. So then you have to reevaluate, and I think it's been more purposeful now, not because of 30. But because of more of just where I'm at in my career, where I want to be, and kind of also just taking care of myself.
Yeah. Okay. I've been telling you, I've been watching Beef. I just finished it, and it is very much like a millennial midlife crisis show. And I do feel like I just turned 30. I guess a month ago. I don't know when this is gonna come out, but in March, I turned 30, and I feel like I think I was in the shower as it turned 12 o'clock, and you know, shower thoughts, the whole thing. I think I literally had some epiphanies as the clock struck 12 about like, okay, this is what I think I should be doing, and like just reevaluating and the retrospect. I don't know if it's just the context of like everyone like, oh, you're about to turn 30, yada yada. But I do feel like, I don't know, something about that show just hit. And I think it was the midlife crisis part of it. Not to say that I am in crisis, but kind of that, like you said, whether it's the natural part of like kind of leaving kind of that, vibrant isn't the right word, but there's a certain type of youth that being in your early 20s is, and in your 20s. And not that we're like super old or anything. We're definitely like barely turning middle age. But there is something I think kind of special about that perspective that you have, that it still is very fresh, but still is feels very tenured. Do you feel that at all with some of the things that you've been reevaluating?
Yes. And I do. Well, it's interesting because I don't feel like it's strictly because of like, man, I'm 30 now. Like I've always felt like a kid. I've always felt like I am 30, but I don't feel 30. I feel like I'm still 18, 19, like, which probably says more about like my own mental, where I'm at. But I think what really, I think it's either time, or it's just like where you're at in your career, or just in your life. Maybe not age related, more of just like what you're making, like in terms of monetary value, in terms of what you're doing, whether you think you have enough like upward mobility, like really thinking about where do I want to be in 5 to 10 years? How am I going to be responsible for myself in its entirety? And kind of, it's either or. And for me, it was the or. And it was just kind of something I was like, oh, I think I need to reevaluate all of this. And I think also, the show, I haven't seen it, but you're taking your word for it. It's like, it seems to be leaning on those anxieties that like millennials are having, but for good reason. Like the show isn't like, it's highlighting, I'm sure, these financial times that we're in, like a lot of this social like anxiety that we're feeling, right? We have two presidents that are very opposite ends. Like there's just no middle ground. It feels like it's either or, we lose, you know?
AVP.
Exactly. Yeah, you got my reference. And it's also like financially, it's like the dollar just, it feels like our money is just not, it's not as strong. It feels like, you know, I've spoken to people and they're like, oh, you know, I'm just trying to get by with my job. And it's like, no, dude, I get it. Like I'm salaried and it's still hard. Like trying to just meet everything and also just go and have fun. And it's like, it gets to this point where you have to like really wonder, like, is it just me? Everything feels a little weird.
Yeah.
And I think it's happening to a lot of more people now. Maybe because it's dirty, but I think it's mostly because of just where we're at economically, socially.
Well, we're literally watching the 99-cent store go away. Have you seen?
Yeah,
all of that stuff?
That was wild.
I mean, there's one down the street, and there's just signs plastered all over, like going out of business. They're selling they're selling the shelves.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. They're selling everything, and it's just, I think, just a sign of like, yo, the dollar is not what it used to be, and it's not like to the day it closed, they were selling everything there for $1 or most things. Like the price had been going up, and even still, it's like. So I guess we still have like Dollar General and like
general store, yeah,
Big
stuff.
Lots, but nothing like, I don't know. It just seems very much a sign of the times watching something like the 99-cent store be like, we can't afford to keep this going.
Well, and I don't know if the 99-cent store is like outside of California thing, but like it's a huge staple in California. Like at some point you went in as a kid and you're like, I had $5-10. I'm like, I feel like a king in here.
Yeah.
And you go in and now it's like, oh damn, like, okay, like this is kind of wild.
Yeah, no, it's usually a shock to me to see even candy for $1 at this point.
Oh yeah.
Like I think the only thing that I see that's $1 really is like old seasonal candy that they're like trying to get rid of. I'm like, okay, cool. But like the days of getting a box of like hot tamales or watermelon Sour Patch or like anything like that, you know, the boxes, gone.
Oh yeah, I remember like the candy that you would put in piñatas, where it was like a cheap bag. It was like maybe $5, $4. It's like now it's just way higher, and it's like, man, like, and that's not $1 per se, but you're kind of just seeing like, damn,
Right.
And so I think it's all those anxieties that are making a lot of people like kind of question where they're at, where they want to be, and how to best take care of yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it seems like it's one after the other. We're not even talking about AI. God knows, that's a whole other like basket.
The AI thing.
Yeah, and people are legitimately wondering, like, is my job safe? And at this point, nobody knows. Nobody knows. It could be that some customer service jobs will be fine, and others, no. Video editors, right? Like, I think that's, you know, I have my own thoughts on AI and video, but even people are wondering, like, can Sora fully replace, like, just videographers and just have anyone the ability to, I want to film a fireplace in the woods and whatever. It's like, it looks good. Like,
Well, what is your opinion on AI? What do you think? Do you think there is a overall net negative behind?
I think it's going to be a net positive, but I think it's going to hurt. And I'm saying
Darkest before the dawn.
Yeah. You know what I mean? First, you gotta capture the Joker. No, I think it will be a net positive. Because I've spoken to people who have used AI in different fields. I know a guy who's an engineer. I've spoken to guys who are coders, programmers, and they're like, AI is, as of right now, as of March of 2024, it's a very powerful tool that needs a lot of hand holding. Like the engineer was like, I'm worried about whether it's gonna take my job. But he's like, it's kind of dumb, actually. Like, it could do very powerful things, but you need a hand hold it. And that's when you benefit most from it. Now, where AI is going to be in 10 years from now, that's a whole different question. But in terms of video, I don't think it's going to be the video killer that people think it is. Because I just think intuitively people bring something that AI doesn't, right? And I mean, I can imagine more people especially video creators using AI to like help them. I've used AI already. Like Adobe has its podcasting tool and it uses AI to kind of refine and optimize volume.
Should I use that for this?
You could, and it might be really good. I was stuck. I lost a source audio to something to like a computer crash. And I was like, I'm really screwed. So I took the scratch audio from the camera. I was like, I got to make this work somehow. Few buttons, pop, 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 and it worked.
Saved it? It was usable?
It was usable. It wasn't 100%. And, you know, if you're initiated, you can hear like, oh, something's a little different about this compared to what we normally do.
Yeah.
But I think to the uninitiated, I think it's like, it sounds a little different, but it's not a problem. Like, it was still all intelligible and stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a tool, at least in the video space, but I don't think it's going to be the absolute killer. I don't think, because I think in the end of the day, humans provide a certain instinct, intuition, and value that just a computer cannot. And computers add a lot of value too. But the best, in my opinion, the best is when you combine the two. Because, you know, if you're an editor, or if you're not an editor and you're like, hey, take this video and edit it, you know, or whatever program, how do you make adjustments? Like, you can type it, but it won't be like as precise. You're just kind of going vaguely. And I think for people looking for vagueness,
then it'll work. Yeah,
it'll work. It's
which
like,
is why like there is I think a market for a lot of that strictly AI generated content that's like super uncanny, and kind of like warped and weird. Like, I think there is going to be a new niche for that type of stuff, like that Seinfeld Twitch stream that was just like an AI generating Seinfeld episodes in, you know, Jerry's apartment or whatever, and it's like it's super basic, you know what I mean? Like, I even think they moved. It was just like kind of like storyboarded, like they moved back and forth between shots, and then the AI is like making up the script and everything. But it's like, can this replace the next Seinfeld? No, it's its own thing. Like, people who are into this are into it. But if you took like your mom and said, hey, watch this, like or my dad who watched Seinfeld, who's watched several episodes, like re-watched several times Seinfeld because we grew up like watching it. If I showed him that, he'd be like, the fuck, what why are you showing me this?
No,
you know
and
I
can't. And that's the thing. I think it's a niche thing, right? Like, I think AI can expand from that and make things that are more popular. Right. One of the things that for some reason, it's just kind of like this ASMR thing that I've seen on Instagram, where people would be like, it's all AI generated, right? And it's like, in what bedroom would you have the best sleep in? And it takes like these 5 generated pictures of like these different bedrooms and different aesthetics. One is like a cabin out in the woods. The other is like this high-rise building. And they have different color palettes and different like compositions and stuff. And you're like, you can't help but just, you know, it's kind of like wish fulfillment. Like, man, I wish I was in that high-rise. But that's it though. Like, that still hasn't replaced like my need to look at other creators and follow other creators and see what they have. It's like, you can have both. Yeah. And I don't think one's going to replace the other. And for sure, the next Seinfeld is not going to come from AI like that. I think. Yeah.
I think it's also tough to say with what we're speaking in this vertical specifically, which is creativity. Like, now, like your coding friend, like where it's a little more. Well, I guess a little less, although there's still some nuance, but a little less nuance as far as like, is something right or wrong kind of thing. If you can get a computer to do something and it's all right, then why would I risk a human making an error when I could just tell the computer to do it and I know it's going to be right? Yeah. Whereas with creativity, with art, like there's never really a wrong or right. It's all like very strictly subjective. Even the most perfect piece of media that you can think of, whether it's a movie or song or whatever, you can think it's perfect, and then someone on the other side of the globe will hear or see what that thing that you think you can argue is a perfect piece of media, and they'll be like, trash.
I've met people who don't like The Dark Knight, and I'm like, how can you not? And it's like, I just don't like it. I'm like, bad. No, but it speaks to that subjectivity, and I always thought it was interesting because on that front, like, creativity is a hard thing to pinpoint, and I'm like, I think. That's why TV shows and movies, they might implement AI in some way. But like, I always thought that the people who were going to suffer were the coders and stuff, the people making this stuff. Because I'm like, I don't know how coding works, but I was like, you know, I've seen people like create websites from ChatGPT, kind of giving it prompts and kind of following the steps from there. And the websites aren't amazing, but they're websites, you know? But again, that just goes into like, we're not sure where it's going to go down the line, or even how it's going to be implemented in the future.
So if you were to use AI for something, what would it be for? Like, what creative endeavor do you think would the soonest for you be make use of AI?
Correcting mistakes. I think the audio one. Well, I think the audio one was definitely fixable. Like, AI didn't do anything that a human couldn't. You know, you give that to someone and they'll be able to do the same thing. But if you're an audio engineer, you'll know the quickest and best way to fix it, right? But like for me, I kind of like to just know a little bit of everything. So I kind of have an idea as to, okay, how do I compose shots? How do I expose? how do I create some 3D simple graphics? How do I edit this together properly?
Yeah.
But I'm not an audio engineer. And like, Adobe Premiere has like the noise, you could take it to Audition, but sometimes you're just moving buttons up and down and knobs, and you're like, am I even making, like, I can't even hear if it's actually better. You get to that point where you're just like,
You become like ear blind almost.
yeah. So AI kind of doing some stuff like that. I think also just getting rid of the blank page, which we've spoken about, but like sometimes you're like, what should be my objective? What should be my goal? And sometimes you just can't totally figure out like how that video is going to come alive. And then you just ask ChatGPT. You're like, hey, I'm looking to create this kind of video with this kind of time length. What are some ways that I could start it off? And then it's just another way of giving you ideas. It's like when you're a graphic designer and you go to Google Images and you just look for inspiration. Again, it's not stealing. You're just like, what kind of color palette am I looking at? What kind of font am I thinking about? Watching other people's videos and just trying to get an idea of like the pacing and stuff. That's on a written level, right? Because sometimes that's always been one of my problems is I used to write a lot. Now I don't write as often. And sometimes just having that blank page, it's just kind of like, oh man, like how do I even start this? Especially when you're making a video for someone. It's like, this is what I want to have in mind. And you're like, all right, I'm gonna take your idea and see what I can come up with. But if I'm having a hard time trying to, all right, well, let me just throw it in ChatGPT and let me just ask.
Yeah, now you have a bunch of stuff you can work off of. I think the interesting thing to me, and at least ChatGPT, I've only really messed with ChatGPT. I haven't messed with like, what is it, Midsummer and
Sora,
or Midjourney,
yeah.
And some of the other ones, the ones that are super premium and will give you images and all that kind of stuff. Oh, what was another one people were making crazy images out of? Dolly, something like.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Dolly Simulator or something like that. It was just one of those, you type in a prompt and it will generate a picture. It'll do its best at least to generate like funeral at Walmart, and it would give you something crazy.
Yeah, and it'll give people like 6-7 fingers.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff like that.
I think it's much better now, but it was definitely a meme back when it first came out, and it was spitting out crazy stuff. I haven't dabbled too hard, but I think right now there are a lot of like inhibitors on what AI can even bring to the table for you. I think what's interesting is, we're very reliant as a society on Google.
Yeah.
In general, the search engine, and almost like more specifically Google. But then even in general, if you're not using Google, it's because you're like sus of big info, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you go to DuckDuckGo or like something else, but you're still using a search engine. Like we are definitely like, if you want to know something, you type it in the search engine and you find it, which wasn't a thing back, in the 80s.
Yeah.
And now we're a society that's pretty relatively addicted to it, which is what I think that like technology and your phone should be for. It's kind of that whole bicycle for the mind thing. Like, I shouldn't have to go to a library and go to the specific row, specific aisle and find a book on that specific thing. Like, I can do it like, on the fly. What I'm curious is when we do take a lot of these, when AI is smart enough and we as a society figure out what we want to do with it or whatever, and we take some of these inhibitors off, asking AI those bigger questions, and society actually being like, you know what I mean? Thumbs up. As far as, hey, I want to run a business. Like, say Elon Musk wants to start a new business and he wants to do it all based on AI because he's crazy. You know what I mean? He wants to be the first CEO to run a business. And so he goes to the makers of ChatGPT or whatever AI he's the most interested in and says, hey, take the handlebars off. And I want to ask it every question I can. I'm going to follow every single step to make a business. And I'm not going to tell anybody except you guys. We're just going to develop this thing and we're going to like make a business. What if he made like a multi-million dollar business in the course of 2 years and then reveals like, hey, AI did the whole thing. Like, I know you thought it was me doing it, but I just this was my grand experiment. Now you have a bunch of people who think that the robot essentially can run their lives. And that, I think, is the scariest part of like we as a society finally, instead of it replacing the Google search, now it's like, hey, I'm depressed. Mr. Machine, what should I do? Hey, I need to make $1 million. Hey, Mr. Machine, what should I do? You know what I mean? And it's like, now we have this thing, as Google kind of is. Like, people use Google to, like, hey, I'm not feeling well.
WebMD.
WebMD. You know,
I was gonna say.
I'm gonna Google this, or hey, I need this thing, and you go to Google, and you know, now there's like 3 or 4 sponsored ads in your. What happens? The next generation that is now used to AI telling them what they should be doing, because we already know kids in high school use this to write their essays and like, you know what I mean? They're only getting more and more used to this AI thing kind of helping them live their lives, and in 20 years it's going to be normal. That's a big one. I know it's a crazy rant.
I think it's
but
because what I don't want to do is say, well, we've gone through this before, because AI is a different beast, and you have a lot of smart people being interviewed and saying like, yeah, AI is kind of a wild thing. Like, we don't even really know how it totally works. Like, we're not, you know, like we know the basics of it, but we don't know where it's headed. I don't want to come here and say like, that's not going to happen, because we've gone through it before. I mean, there was entire generations. Our parents didn't use Google growing up, and now we did. And now we're dependent on Google. And you could say like, you know, has it been a net positive or a net negative? I would say net positive, honestly, in the grand scheme of things. So why are we worried about AI doing that? Why? It's like, well, AI isn't like your best friend, but ChatGPT can pretend. If you ask it to, it can be your best friend. And I mean, it's tough because we don't know where AI is going to be. And also we have to, I think, especially after the pandemic, people have gone a little more antisocial. Like, they become a little bit more socially clueless.
I think there's a built-in agoraphobia in everyone a little bit.
Yes.
Or well, not everyone. That's a super broad term, but a lot of people who are inherently introverted, I don't think have totally like recovered. I think they definitely hide, but I know I do hide behind some of the niceties that are now allowed to me to get out of social situations because the pandemic happened.
Yeah, and I do feel like, I mean, we've had tools brought into our life that means that we don't really have to like go out and interact with people. We could have your groceries brought to your house if you're willing to pay. Or you can contact your friends through your phone or social media. You can play video games all day. You can see other people play video games. Like, you could stay at home and stream hours and hours of movie and television and never go out. And you can work remotely too. So, and some people really like that lifestyle, and that's cool. But when it's afforded to everyone, and now you have someone who can be your companion in a sort, hey, ChatGPT, can you find me a good banana nut bread recipe? It's like, sure. Can you walk me through it? Yeah, absolutely. So here's what we're going to do. And as you know, we already have like AI companions and stuff, and AI influencers and AI models and stuff that people are like,
yeah. Because that's the thing. I don't think that AI looks like Skynet.
No.
I think it looks. I don't think it's something that necessarily turns against us and goes full Ultron. I think that it's more so, and I don't know if it's scary or inevitable, or like, you know, that whole theory that like AI will take over one day and everyone who didn't like side with the machines will be like, hey, why didn't you help me come into power, essentially?
yeah.
I do think that, and by the way, we are not experts.
No, we're not.
I should have made that disclaimer a while ago. We don't build, we don't code, we don't build this stuff. We are strictly speaking from the perspective of two people living in society.
Yes.
In society and watching it affect our jobs and the jobs of our friends and things like that.
Well, this is going back to the anxieties that we were talking about earlier, right? We just don't know how it is. We're just talking about it.
We're just talking about it.
We're guessing.
Is that eventually we could get to a point, and we're already kind of there, like I said, with the Google thing and being addicted to the search bar. You can't get a phone without it anymore. You know, like Facebook comes on your phone. Depending on, you know, if you get a Google phone, Google's going to be on it.
Yep.
It's going to have Google Calendar, Google Search, Google Docs, like whatever. If you get an iPhone, it's going to have Siri on it.
Yep.
You can't get rid of it. It's just, it is built into your phone.
Yeah.
And I think we potentially have the potential to eventually become a society that has like AI strapped to us all the time, informing us all the time. And that is literally a ghost in the machine, like will be driving society, and it won't be from a like, hey, it's time for us to take over, here come the robots and everything. It's just like, hey, like the computer's in the back, it knows how we're feeding it data, and it knows how it wants to move society around. And we don't exactly know what it's gonna do. Like it is its own thing technically, but like we know it has its plans for us as a whole. It's just informing us how to move it can do it on an individual basis.
Well, and I do think, I mean, now I'm just moving on to another
Big
topic.
sci-fi.
Big sci-fi. But it's also, I think the scary thing about it is we're not in control of this, right? Like we're not in control. We're not pulling the levers of more ChatGPT. Those are the companies, that's for the companies that are creating this stuff and pushing it, like OpenAI and stuff. And there is a concern about who's running this stuff. And it's not just AI. I mean, we could take it to every aspect. The film industry, right? What's the pieces of media that these companies are pushing, and how is it created, right? And for what purpose?
Yeah.
You're talking about, we're talking about government. And now I think there's a concern with, do we even trust these people? No. Do they like us? No. And I mean, probably some of them do, probably they don't. And they're like, look, man, this is the next step. And this is what our company has to pursue in order to make profits. And we've seen it time and time again.
Yep.
So that's the concern. It's, I can't imagine a company having a very powerful AI tool just being like, we'll let people decide how much they want to implement our AI tool. We'll just let them. No, they're going to be like, we want to make this accessible for everyone.
Right.
And their justification...
They're going to put it on every phone. Once they figure it out, it's not going to be a Google search bar. It will be a ChatGPT search bar. Or whatever it ends up being.
Whatever it ends up being. And they're not going to say, hey... Like, they're going to say, well, you can use it if you want. But if you don't use it, you're going to miss out on A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And look, we're giving you the option. But, it's just, and they're going to push it. They're going to push that lever like Apple did with Siri. You don't even have an option at this point. Now, you don't have to use Siri, but I can imagine.
I imagine most people with iPhones use Siri.
Really?
I would assume they do.
I'd actually think the opposite. I don't know that many people use it, but I think
Oh,
Siri,
really? I thought everyone's like, hey, Siri, blah, blah, blah.
I don't think so. I think most people are just fine with typing stuff in, but I think Siri, it was just that first step. And I think ultimately the throttle is on these companies, and I'm sure that they're willing to push it all the way if it promises profits and higher revenues. So,
well, anywho,
giant
long
sorry
tangent. AI is a very interesting topic, and it affects us because we make stuff, and I think there's always this this fear that creatives have, and this isn't new with AI. There's a fear that creatives have every time a new piece of technology gets introduced into any field, whether it's music, film and television, art in general, like fine art, painting, whatever it is. Once a new piece of technology gets introduced, everyone freaks out and says, oh no, it's either A, going to make me obsolete, or B, it's going to make the audience used to an artificial type of art that isn't the real thing. You know what I mean? You're talking about DJs and like the sync button on some modern mixers, or you're
illustrators.
Everything. And so we're at the precipice now, and I think that's why it's so interesting to us, because we're trying to figure out how it's going to affect us as up and coming filmmakers. Is it going to get to a point where it's going to make it harder for us to make what we want to make because people are watching AI content, or companies don't feel that they need us because they can use an AI to make their stuff? And I think it's something obviously to keep an eye on. Like I would never say that you are worse off just ignoring something like that. Like it is good to know what probably the artist that comes after you is going to be using to compete with, quote unquote, compete with you down the line. Like, hey, the kids are using this to make movies and people watch them. It doesn't mean you should change your tactics. It doesn't mean like, oh, they're using that, so I should be using it. But you should be aware of it, because it's like, you are competing for people's time. And it's like, if you do have something to put out that is worthwhile for people and it doesn't use modern tools or whatever, then you do have to be aware that, hey, they have like other art verticals that they can consume. So it's like, we think about it a lot. Like, is this something that I should incorporate? Is it something that I need to ignore? Is it something that will affect this form at some point and I'll have to think about it? And so I think about it, and I've used it. I've used ChatGPT. Like I told you, I've used it before for notes on like a script. And it's not like I use the notes very stringent, like, oh yeah, ChatGPT said I should add this to my script. But it's just like, okay, what are the good parts about the script? What are the bad parts about the script? Where is it weak? Where is it weak? Where is it strong? And I can use that as a basis for feedback without having to wait for someone to read something, because it's just there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like you said, I think we were talking when we talked about this off camera. It's like you have like a non-subjective point of view. Like, is ChatGPT totally subjective or totally
as close
objective?
as you can get?
Yeah, and honestly, it's not like a bad thing. Just run it, just check, and it might bring a bit of feedback that maybe you didn't think about. Maybe you had a blind spot for that, or maybe it's just something like, oh, I had a feeling, and now that ChatGPT recognizes it, like it just further pushes me in the direction that was wrong, or that was, I needed to fix that. Yeah, no, I 100% agree. It's something that I keep an eye on as like very vigilantly. It's like, what kind of content are people like watching? And you have to think about this, right? Because you're not, again, it's not just YouTube videos competing with YouTube. It's YouTube competing with TikTok, competing with Instagram, competing with Facebook, competing with Netflix, competing with all the other streaming services.
Competing with the theater.
Oh my God, competing with cable television. You have to think of, because again, there's so many ways that people are entertained now. And it again, like back in the day when YouTube, like back in 05, 06, YouTube was just something that the kids used for a few hours to watch some dumb videos.
Yeah, usually really dumb videos.
Cat videos or stupid videos.
Yeah, Boxhead by Smosh.
Oh,
you know
God.
what I mean?
What was the finger guy?
Salad.
Salad fingers.
Salad fingers. Yeah.
It's just weird stuff. And so, but you know, your main attention was TV, movie theaters, and that was about it, right? But now it's like, you know,
and that's 05. That's still a lot of options. I'm not gonna lie. Like, you still had websites, and so we had Funny Junk and Funny or Die and all these other Newgrounds,
Addicting Games, Armor Games,
all this stuff. I mean, we used to be is theater, and then you had a TV, and if you had a TV, it was channel 2, 5, and 7.
2, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, like all the odd numbers.
Even that is still like relatively modern. I'm talking about the first TVs that rolled out, where like the TV went off after a certain hour.
And the thing is, it's the type of content too, because it could be super specialized. If you like POV kitchen restaurant management, you can find that. That's a weird niche that I fell deep into. It's like very weird. It's like a guy has a GoPro and he's in a kitchen and you see him do kitchen stuff. I was like,
I've seen that McDonald's guy do that.
Oh,
there's a GoPro in a McDonald's and you just see him like work a lunch shift. You know,
I never thought that was a thing. And it's on every platform. And again, it's like, and you know, as like a creator, you know, as like an editor, as like a videographer, you want to bring eyes to what you're doing. So you're like, all right, how am I going to do this? So do I add a title, subtitles? You know, we've kind of thought about the first 6 seconds of video is kind of like important. Do you cut for retention or do you not? There's so many options to consider. That's why also, going quickly back to the AI thing, like that's why I don't think AI is going to totally take it, because there's just too many ways to go about it to make a video.
Yeah.
But these are things that you have to pay attention to. It's like, are we cutting for retention? Are we cutting for views? Are we cutting for engagement, comments? Or are we just cutting for views? It's too many ways to see it.
Yeah. But speaking of going about content, I did kind of want to talk to you because we definitely bonded over content.
Yeah.
Like obviously we started making short films together and a feature and all that kind of stuff. But content is really like what we've been technically doing for a while. And we definitely bonded over a group of creators called Funhouse.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk to you about Rooster Teeth and the current state of content, because you have a podcast.
Yeah.
I'm doing a podcast right now. I've got an entire content plan that I want to do, because I have a love affair with content as well as like traditional media. And I just kind of wanted to talk to you about Rooster Teeth and its soon to be departed presence from the internet, which it didn't seem like that would ever really be a thing. It's just kind of been around since the early days of like video sharing. You know what I mean? As far as, you know, with from established platforms, at least. Like obviously video sharing was around way before YouTube.
Publicly, Rooster Teeth was very much at the forefront of that.
But as far as, keeping up with content and how distribution is just, it still surprises us how much distribution can just explode, right? Like at any moment, like all of a sudden there's a new lane of distribution that everyone has to think about, and it has its own meta and its own creators and its own economy, and now you have to deal with it, and you have some, a huge player in that scene that's been around that hasn't, I guess, didn't adjust properly, made some poor decisions along the line, and wasn't able to keep up with all of the verticals. How do you feel about like Rooster Teeth not being around anymore? Do you feel like it was inevitable? Do you feel like this was preventable? What's your take?
Was it preventable? Absolutely. Because you've even had the people at Rooster Teeth say like, there's a lot of things that we could have done differently. Like they could have said we could have pivoted to a younger audience. Because Rooster Teeth was always young, right? We just grew up with it. We grew up, but they needed to target younger audiences. So some people have gone and say, we didn't do a good enough job of targeting younger audiences. They didn't find ways of staying fresh. And like, you know, I loved the Funhouse, but eventually you kind of you stop. Like you kind of, it just happens, you know. You just like, oh, okay, well, I don't feel the same urgency to watch this person as I did 5 years ago, which is part of the content like economy. Like you could really be attached to one person and then suddenly just not be, because maybe they've changed something, the format's not the same, or maybe you're just like, oh, you've lost touch with them. You know, sometimes you lose touch with friends. And
well, it's kind of like what we've mentioned before, is like content has largely become the new network television.
Yes.
As far as, you know, you start and it's like a pilot season, right? And it's usually rough. If you go back on any big creator and look at their channel, their first year of making videos, it's usually like a rough time for them. Like they're still figuring themselves out. Camera quality is shoddy. Their personality is like it's not entirely different, but it's definitely not like fine tuned to what you're accustomed to. And you know, with streaming and everything like that, there's just such a veil of like you had to kill your competition to be here. Whereas like with content, anyone can get started at any given time, and anyone can blow up at any given time. You never know when your time is going to come. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things where if it is the new television shows usually fucking end. You know what I mean? Like they, at some point, unless you're The Simpsons, like which is one in how many shows?
Well, but The Simpsons is going to end. That's not
what we think. But even still, that's like one show out of how many? How many shows have been like come and gone since The Simpsons aired their first episode? Like maybe a million? I don't know.
The biggest television shows have all ended.
They
Friends,
all end.
Seinfeld, Frasier, Cheers, like God,
everything ends on television. But when it still has the same kind of like life cycle as television. You start, maybe you get a cast, a couple of friends who pop into videos, or you finally get your format down. You know, maybe you're Moist Critical and, you know, your format is finally down. But how long does Moist Critical have to do that format? Does he have 5 seasons, 6 seasons? A Simpsons amount of seasons? You know what I mean?
I imagine someone's gonna be able to do it for the rest of their lives like The Simpsons, but most people can't.
Most people can't. And if you don't think about that, and maybe that's even a modern thought. Like me thinking this right now is just modern because I have so much experience watching content. 20 years, 25 years of watching content, that now I can think this way. But when you're Rooster Teeth, it's like, did you think about it as far as like, hey, some things have to end so we can start new things, or do we just keep achievement hunters going until the business shuts down?
Which is interesting because that's what college humor did.
College humor.
That's what College Humor did, because now they're Dropout.
Yeah.
So College Humor was huge back in the day. They had a great cast, you know, and they're
essentially Saturday Night Live online.
They were Saturday night for college kids, or even middle school, you know, just kids. And if you wanted to be edgy, you know, you watch College Humor.
Yeah.
But, you know, all those people left. Like the OG cast left because they wanted to pursue different things. Some of them did work at SNL. Others just went to go become writers, different stuff, right? And you brought a new cast in. And I can't remember exactly why, but just College Humor wasn't hitting as hard. Maybe format change, maybe people didn't like the new cat. I don't know. And instead of them being phased out and completely dying, they pivoted, and now they're like their own streaming service. Now they put their own thing, and now they have people directly paying them, like, you know, Patreons kind of. So they properly went about it, you know. But you really have to think about, where are we at and where are we going to be?
Yeah.
And I don't know if Rooster Teeth did that. Granted,
I think they did. I think that they thought that they were going to be maybe a more traditional studio, because they did some big stuff. They had RBY, they had Genlock, they had all this stuff that were like touring Genlock at Sundance, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They had Laser Team, which was like a huge crowdfunded campaign. And I don't know, it just kind of felt like they were making big bets, spending a lot of money on these big bets, rather than kind of reinventing their content cycle and lifestyle.
Thinking about what that content is, because you know, people have from Rooster Teeth have talked about it. It's like, what really kind of pivoted Rooster Teeth were acquisitions, and a lot of companies that we've seen have gone down because of acquisitions. What was that media group? Fullscreen,
Yeah.
Fullscreen.
I think that, did they have Rooster Teeth, or was that Smosh?
I think Rooster Teeth or Fullscreen owned Rooster Teeth, I believe.
Okay.
But Rooster Teeth was bought out by Warner's, which is who ultimately, you know.
Gotcha,
And I think that goes to kind of the way content is very different from traditional, but people want it to be traditional. These companies want to be traditional because that's how you're seen as successful. That's why they made Laser Teams. Like, oh, now we're in the big leagues.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can't easily translate attention from the internet into traditional views, but companies also want that. The creators want to be taken more seriously, probably, or like be seen as more mainstream. And you have these big companies like, well, why isn't Rooster Teeth bringing in millions and millions of dollars? Like, and you know, I think someone from Rooster Teeth was like, that's not how it works. Like, you can't just expand the company and bring in a ton of revenue. Like, that's not how it works. Like, this is all ad based. It's not perfectly translated, and to have those kind of expectations to make that jump from content to traditional media, it's not as easy. It's not as seamless, and you kind of have to go in and think like that. But you have some of these old heads in old traditional medias that don't get that. They're just like, well, Rooster Teeth isn't delivering, and we just got to cut them. Now, granted, Warner's is. I don't know if that's the mindset that Warner's was in, because Warner's is trying to get rid of, or they're trying to pay back their debt.
Yeah.
Right. Because after the whole Warner acquisition, they have a lot of money to pay back. They have a huge amount of debt, and that's why they gave up on Batgirl and Acme versus Coyote.
I was about to say Woody Woodpecker versus.
Yeah, it's those are what tax.
Some sort of tax deductible write-off.
Yeah, right. Yeah, something like that. So because they're paying that debt back. But I can very easily imagine Warner's, even if they weren't paying off debt, they'd be like, well, instead of sitting down, it's like, all right, how can we best use Rooster Teeth to just help promote the stuff that we're doing? Or how can we grow it? How can we maintain this?
Right.
This
Clearly,
audience?
we have people who can write shows, write movies, anime. There's clearly a lot of creative talent here. There's an entire talent pool here.
Yes.
How can we use it to our benefit instead of, that looks like a lot of free money if we just let everybody go.
Yeah, and instead of protecting and helping them, they're like, hey man, look, we owe a ton of money and our shareholders are up our nuts. Fuck it, let's just axe them. And you know what? Hey man.
Yeah, no, I get it. I do think, and I love Rooster Teeth. I used to work at Rooster Teeth. I grew up watching not only Funhouse as Funhouse with Rooster Teeth, but a lot of that crew back when they were at Machinima, another big content farm of a bygone era. But I do think it was a little inevitable. I think they had to go, unfortunately. I think as content has evolved and we're trying to figure out exactly what the perfect content company machine looks like, Rooster Teeth just I don't think was ever going to be it. And moving forward, there are a lot more new media companies that are a lot more holistic in how they view content and how they structure their companies in general. Like I think about Ludwig with like Mogul Moves and all that kind of stuff, like how he structured his company and how he goes about creating businesses under his moniker is just way more smarter than Rooster Teeth, which unfortunately, and I think it's just not necessarily a matter of like bad business practice or smarts. It's just everyone is a product of their time.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of people who started that company who came up, they're older than us. They're Gen Xers, or they have a different view of what media was, and they were at the frontier of this thing when they started. But as far as like being born in it, molded by it, and like seeing the future in it now, like where it's going, like I think they were just like, it ended up being, let's just make another podcast. Yeah. You know what I mean? Instead of, like you said, really tackling the new audience and what they need to be doing, even to stay relevant with us. Because even like you look at some of the Rooster Teeth videos that were coming out, and it's like, this is like a 4 million sub channel, and these videos are getting like 10,000 views. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like they weren't even relevant to us anymore. So I think it was inevitable. I think it was just like, hey, that era of the internet, and how we, not only that era of the internet, but how we thought about new media has just largely changed. Yeah, and like what it does for the economy and creators and all that kind of stuff. And this way of doing it, this traditional model, trying to shove the new media / content creation model into this like traditional structure, it's not gonna work until someone figures it out, and then we can start slowly integrating it. But it's gonna take a lot of perspective shifting,
which a lot of people don't want to.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, especially in traditional media, are like, oh, this just, hey man, look, this is my metrics. So shit, fit in my metrics. And it's just not going to happen that way. I think as these people get older, they're going to be phased out, and younger people. Again, you're going to have more Ludwigs that are going to come in, and people are going to want to work with them because these creators bring in so many big eyes, so many eyes. I mean, Mr. Beast.
Mr. Beast is another one.
Mr. Beast is interesting because is he going to be like, because we've kind of compared him to like a game show host. Right, he's more than that. Obviously, like he is like a producer. He is,
but his main like what people know him for is being a game show host.
Yes,
he largely umbrella wise. Yeah,
forward facing wise, right? Yeah. Like he is an entrepreneur. He's a CEO. He's a producer. Yeah. But he is very front facing. He is a game show host, right? But people want to work with him, and I can't help but imagine, like, I'm sure there are a bunch of like people like him, maybe not as camera facing as he is, and they're gonna grow up and. Amazon, Netflix, like these guys are competing against TikTok and YouTube. They're going to keep competing. They're like, we need these people on our team. And then it's because, Mr. Beast is making a show with Amazon. Yeah. I can't imagine Amazon being like, hey, I want to do this. Mr. Beast's like, fuck you. You're going to tell me how to do this? You either roll with what I'm doing or I leave. And either he's
definitely got the leverage.
Oh, he has plenty of leverage,
Unless Jeff himself flies down to set to tell him, like, hey, so we're doing it this way. I don't think there's a producer at Amazon that can really bully him like that.
No. And no, granted, he's like one of the biggest, obviously. One of the biggest. But like, if there are other creators that other people would be willing to like work with and maybe not say no as much. The Ludwigs, the Moist Criticals, the what's his name, PewDiePie. Like, if they wanted to, I think a lot of these guys have just hit like just gotten a little tired because they've been doing it for years.
Yeah.
And they're moving on. Like, they've done stuff. Like, they're working on different projects. Like, Markiplier's making a movie. PewDiePie is married. I think he has a kid. I think he's working on his own projects. Ludwig is running his own company. But I think they are eventually going to get back into the game. And I think the people working with them are going to get back into the game. And I think there's going to be a shift into this new media content space.
So where does that leave Jorge Montoya?
It's very interesting because, like, this is a conversation that you and I have had multiple times over the past like month or so, and I've asked that question a lot more, and my answer is I still don't know exactly what me or my content are going to look like 5 years from now. Like, I can't give you an exact answer, but I've started asking the question. and I've started honing in on, okay, what are the things that I need to start doing? And for me, video has always been the thing. Like, I have committed myself to this, right? This is what I studied. This is what I like doing. Filmmaking. Like, my goal is still to make a feature-length film. Like, that's gonna happen whether I do it by myself or I drag you with me. You don't need to be dragged, I don't feel like. I feel like you'd be walking down with me. But,
well, we'll see.
But even if you're like, I'd be like, no, you're coming here. Because that's just my, ultimately that's my North Star, right? Is making feature films, even if it's just one that I fully make and just put out on YouTube. It's like, that's the goal. Mm-hmm. Now, how do I get there? That's a different route, right? And I think it's just committing to being like this video producer thing, right? Because I have touched the different fields on different facets of the production world, just doubling down on it, but also becoming a little less dependent on these institutions, on these salaries, and kind of really think about, okay, what do I want to do for just me? Mm-hmm. How can I feed myself? What can I put out? What kind of stuff would I want to make? And it's just thinking about, what do I want to do daily? And when you think about that, you're like, you look at what everybody else is doing, and it's like, there's a ton of things. People are streaming, people are making documentaries, posting them on YouTube, people are working for commercials, people are just video creators on making videos. Mm-hmm. And it's like, wow, what is that? What does it look for Jorge to do his own thing? And I honestly don't really know, but it is doubling down on being like a video producer, like being the guy that you could go to. It's like, I want to make a video. Mm-hmm. How do I do it?
Talk a little bit about, because we like you said, we talked about it, but you mentioned Seth Worley, as like not a North Star per se, but like one of your main inspirations of what that could look like.
Yes.
Why Seth Worley?
Because number one, I love the dude. He's funny, but it's the energy.
And who, if you were to describe to someone who didn't know who Seth Worley was, how would you describe what he even?
So he's a filmmaker. He's a filmmaker. He's like an educator. He's like a VFX artist, but he's really someone. He's like a video creator or a director, and he's made short films. Like, he is very filmmaking focused. Like, he teaches like. He has tutorials and stuff on filmmaking, VFX, kind of the whole production process. He makes a bunch of short films that I think are hilarious. Real Gun is one of our favorite short films of all time.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like the vibe that he carries, in the sense that he is not the most camera-facing person, but he is someone who's constantly working on different projects. Like, for example, Ryan Connolly is a very camera-facing guy. Like, Ryan Connolly's a director, writer, producer. Like, he does it all. Mm-hmm. But he's Ryan
Connolly, a film riot.
Yes. Mm-hmm. But he's very much more an educator. Whereas Seth Worley is in the world of production. Like, the dude is making commercials. He's working at a company that works on VFX, like Red Giant. And he's trying to make his own movies. Like, he's trying to make his own movies, and he's making his own shorts. And I'm like, I like that. Like, if you had to ask myself, like, who would you kind of want to, like, kind of be, like, outside of, like, Christopher Nolan and just, you know, it's like, I like the Seth Worley types, you know, like the people that make their own creative projects, make their own short films, like narrative filmmaking, but kind of just kind of bounce between different projects and different formats.
I just think that it's really interesting because his archetype, this filmmaker who does stuff largely in the realm of digital, right? We're talking about, like you said, Ryan Connolly, Seth Worley, Sam and Nico of Corridor Digital. These guys who are like very clearly cinematically inclined, but largely make content, at least like on a regular basis. It may not be their main focus all of the time, but on a regular basis, they do have a company that makes content. It's such a new archetype for filmmakers to follow, because, you know, even for me, like, my big inspirations when I started writing, it was like, you know what, I think I might be into this this movie making thing. I didn't grow up like think, oh, Spielberg's the best director ever, Scorsese, or like I didn't see like Pulp Fiction, and it blew my mind so hard that I had to like go make movies. which is what a lot of when you hear those people and they're behind the scenes, they're like, oh yeah, I didn't know people. I was blown away by this movie, and then I saw behind the scenes for the first time, and I realized, oh my gosh, people make movies. Like I always knew people made movies. Like by the time I was born, like the filmmaking industry was like pushing like these young directors so hard as far as these like miracle stories of like, you know, young directors coming up and doing stuff, M. Night and, you know, all these people, the next Steven Spielbergs and yada yada, JJ and
the next Peter Jackson, Neil Blomkamp.
Yeah, it was like a very front-facing thing. Like, okay, there's an industry here and they're making movies, and like maybe if you try hard enough and you get lucky enough, you'll become one. But I think for us, what made filmmaking feel a little more real, a little more tangible, a little more interesting was those personalities like Freddie Wong, Sam and Nico, Seth Worley, Ryan Connolly, these people who are online, not necessarily making movies for Hollywood. Maybe they dabble a little bit in some larger budget stuff, but this kind of boots on the ground. If you like process, if you genuinely like filmmaking, right? Like it's not just an ego trip for you to be the director. You like sitting down, figuring out how to make a movie, then actually shooting that movie, then going into post and making that movie work, then I think you should be a filmmaker. Yeah. You know what I mean? Not just like, oh, I have the greatest story to tell. I must tell this story. I must
cinema.
Yeah. This story that must be told. You know what I mean? Which is a personality that, yes, can work, but often not like burns out at a certain point.
It burns out, and it's very much tied to like this incredible artistic vision that just cannot, like you have to commit wholeheartedly to it.
And not only you, but everyone else has to commit wholeheartedly to your vision, or they can go eat a dick. And
that was the rock stars back in the day. These were the Francises. These were the Coppolas. These were the Scorseses of the time, where it's like we are doing this.
James Cameron.
Oh yeah. And it's interesting because I think that's been my biggest revelation in the past month or so.
Yeah.
Was I grew up with that idea, the first idea that you said. I didn't know that people got paid to make movies. Like I was very traditional. I'm a very basic bitch film. Like
I think you said Pulp Fiction was in fact the movie that
How many people
sent you over?
I watched Pulp Fiction. I was like, wow, that was incredible. I watched that one in middle school. I was like, I've never seen a movie like that. And little did I know, it's like, oh, every basic film dude said the exact same thing. So it's coming from that background. And, you know, talking about the Sam and Nikos and the Freddie Wongs, especially for a long time being young, I was like, oh, this is cool. But it ain't James Cameron. Mm-hmm. It ain't Marty. It ain't Tarantino. You know, this is the riffraff, you know, they're just making funny videos, right? Mm-hmm. But as you grow older, you can't help but admire what these guys have built and what they're doing. And I think, especially in the past month, it's been like moving from trying to be this traditional mindset of, oh, just get into the system and make your movies and yada, yada, yada. It's like, dude, that's fucking impossible. Like most of these guys, most of these heavy hitters.
It's impossible, or it's possible, but it's still just as much of a fucking headache.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, why are you bending over backwards for people that sometimes don't even fucking know what they're doing? I mean, how many movies come out now that are fucking terrible? You're like, how did people make this? And it's you know, and sometimes the director's like, look, man, I was up against the wall. Like these people told me what to do. So I think it's been shifting from that traditional media format of like, I need to make movies and I want to do this and I want to do that. And it's like embracing new media wholeheartedly. And what does that mean for me? I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if I'm going to be camera facing. I don't know if I'm going to go even more behind the scenes and just like never show my face, but I'm like the guy that gets the shit done. But it's becoming a less dependent on these traditional companies, these companies taking care of you. Because I mean, especially now, you and I, it's in March, we're reading stories about all these people getting laid off. All of us, we're all reading stories about how thousands of people are losing their job. Company loyalty is at an all-time low, you know? So why am I going to invest all my time and energy into a system that's broken, that's been broken, into companies that ultimately will let you go when it's best for them? And instead thinking, what do I have to say and what do I have to do and what can I do to get there? And that's where I very much have shifted my mindset to. And I don't know. I know you and I have spoken, and I've kind of have the North Stars. Still making my movie, still gonna make a feature-length film. It might not go to studio. It'll go to YouTube probably, or just like, all right, I made a movie. I can die peacefully. Still making that, but it's also like, how can I really make a living off of this, and how can I feel fulfilled and take care of myself and not be dependent on Hollywood or company, all these companies. And it's like, take care of yourself, do what you need to do.
Well, shit, man. You sound more enlightened than anyone I know in the studio system already.
It's, man, I mean, well, and look,
it's the right way to approach the Wild West. You're going to the Wild West. It's a frontier. You've got a non-traditional North Star now. And it's not just about meeting the right person at the right time and doing the right project for the right person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like going through all the gatekeeper hoops. It's more so about what is it going to be that works for me, and how do I get to a point where I'm ready to really accomplish that in the way that I want? Like what is my mind's eye really showing me, so I can get that out there and like die happy that I got it out there. And hopefully make some money in the process.
Yeah. And again, I think it's just been this event these past few months that have just kind of made me start thinking about this. And you as well have been asking me about this. And before I was like, I'll be fine. I'll figure it out. Now I am figuring it out.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that, oh man, this stuff is kind of daunting, but it's, again, I feel like it's ultimately the right path. And why leave my fate up to other people who don't give a shit about me?
At the end of the day.
Yeah.
Well, George, thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me. It's always been fun. It's always fun talking to you.
And I think you've been on set long enough to know what I'm going to ask you to do next.
Absolutely.
Which is the outro. Mm-hmm. So I'm not even going to explain. I'm not even going to explain what it is. You can just go ahead, take us out.
All right. My name's George Montoya, and this is Dope.
Naughty Gang Nation.